This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms.
A heads up, y'all, we are talking about slurs in this episode, so you may hear some offensive terms. All right, on to the show. What's good? You're listening to Code Switch, the show about race and identity from NPR. I'm Gene Demby. So you know, if you rock with us on Code Switch, that we are a bunch of true blue word nerds. The name of our show comes from sociolinguistics, and a lot of our beat ends up being about language, because language is political, it's about power and the ability to define ourselves and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. That's all fine and important, but come on, so much of language is just fun, right? It even comes with a frisson of danger.
Frisson, noun, a brief moment of emotional excitement.
You probably remember being a kid and sneaking to look up bad no-no words in the dictionary. We see you, you ain't slick. The internet has made that kind of semantic snooping so much easier. And it's also given the folks at the dictionary a bunch of data about what people look up to boot, including slurs. And apparently, based on that data, one of Merriam-Webster's most looked up words on their site is the N-word.
N-word? Noun. Offensive. Used as an insulting and contemptuous term for a black person.
If you go to the real-world headquarters of the Merriam-Webster Dictionary in Springfield, Massachusetts, they have this gigantic archive, full of cabinets and drawers, where the people who have worked there over the many, many years the dictionary has been around keep little notes and slips and citations for how each word that eventually goes into the dictionary is used IRL. These slips include notes from editors and definers to each other, but they've also folded in letters from the wider public. It's correspondence over what the dictionary should do about a word or how folks in the world feel about that word. And this particular word, the N-word, has way more citations than most do.
I pulled out the drawer when I first looked for the word, and it was well over a linear foot of slips about the N-word and derivations of the N-word. And that's a lot for the cabinets.
That voice you're listening to belongs to
Stefan Fatsis. I am a journalist and author.
And Stefan embedded with the Merriam-Webster Dictionary to write his new book, which is called
Unabridged, The Thrill of and Threat to the Modern Dictionary.
Stefan's book is about the dictionary, obviously, but it's also about this fascinating history over how people have tried to define American English. And he has a whole chapter in his book dedicated to how Merriam-Webster has wrestled with and fought over slurs, like the N-word. And so he got to digging through their archives.
The most contentious words obviously tend to have more information about them because the tendency of definers, of editors, is to flag these things and to have made slips about them.
He pulled down every edition of Merriam-Webster's dictionaries off the shelves
in a room that had a wall just filled with the unabridged dictionaries.
And he looked at how the folks at Merriam-Webster treated these radioactive words over their editions across centuries at this point.
Which gives you a sense of how culture viewed words through time. It's a kind of a forensic act that is revelatory because you try to go inside the mind of the, again, white people that were defining this word. The way that the word was defined in 1864 was that a Negro in derision or depreciation. So we know historically that the word had this deprecatory sense from the outset. I mean, the word, you will find reference to the word, the earliest known published use in English is from 1574. It goes back. And the nuance around it is fascinating to me because editors are trying to sort of parse what's the right monetary label to stick on here.
And there were these big philosophical splits among definers and editors at the dictionary over the role of the dictionary in the language. Like, is it our job to just tell people how to use these words in American English? Or is our job about writing down how American English speakers are already using these words? Like, either of those is kind of a pointed political position, right? And listener, I want to invite you to go down this rabbit hole with us and do some semantic spelunking, because this is the latest episode in our long-running series on Code Switch called Word Watch. But on this episode, we talk about the watchers of the words. Like, whether it's heated debates about race or disability or pronouns, it turns out the dictionary has been at the center of these fights for a long time.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Abrams Books. This holiday season, give them a present that takes the cake. From #1 international best-selling author Jeff Kinney comes the brand new Diary of a Wimpy Kid book, Party Pooper. 50% words, 50% cartoons, and 100% hilarious fun. The Diary of a Wimpy Kid series has turned millions of kids into readers around the world. So join the party, share some laughs, and make this holiday season a piece of cake. Buy the brand new Diary of a Wimpy Kid book, Party Pooper, today. Available now at your local retailer.
This message comes from Greenlight. Parents say financial literacy is the hardest life skill to teach. Greenlight's debit card and money app for families makes it easy for kids to learn to earn, save, and spend wisely. Start today, risk-free, at greenlight.com/NPR. This message comes from Schwab. Everyone has moments when they could have done better, like cutting their own hair or forgetting sunscreen, so now you look like a tomato. Same goes for where you invest. Level up and invest smarter with Schwab. Get market insights, education, and human help when you need it. Learn more at schwab.com. This message comes from NPR sponsor eBay, who is home to millions of parts for your next project and free returns. If it doesn't fit or it isn't what you expected, eBay has your back. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay. Things people love.
All right, listener, before we get into it, I wanted to talk about this scandal that swirled around the Merriam-Webster dictionary in 1961. People were like clutching their pearls and writing furious op-eds in the New York Times about the vulgarization of our culture. Like, it was a legit culture war panic. And that's because that was the year that the newest edition of the Merriam-Webster dictionary, what many people saw as the kind of Bible for how to speak good American English, that was the year they decided to include the word ain't.
Ain't. Contraction. Am not, are not, is not.
Stefan says people are still big mad about that to this day. Like, some people still reject that edition of the dictionary. But the way that we, the public, see the role of the dictionary and the way that the people at Merriam-Webster see their jobs, that's very different.
The dictionary does see itself as a guide, as opposed to the final word. The dictionary, I think the editors at Merriam-Webster would say that our job is to show you how something has been used, how words have evolved, the way that we use them now. And we will continuously update that as language changes. I don't think that, and then it's for you to do with it what you will. I mean, the lexicographers are just there to show, and then how people decide to use language, well, that's up to them. They can disregard what the dictionary says and change the course of a word or a phrase. That's the way, that's the way humans operate. I mean, no one's going to be like the notion of this prescriptive approach toward language that you can't say this because the dictionary says it's wrong. That doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it's hard enough in the digital age for anyone to go to an actual dictionary when, more likely you're just going to type something into Google and whatever pops up top, you're going to say, well, look at that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a chapter in your book about how Merriam-Webster treats slurs. And you begin that chapter by talking about what my editor Leah would call the paradigmatic example of a slur, the N-word. And what's interesting about the N-word, the way that the dictionary has treated the N-word over time has had to grapple with like the fact that, you know, some people use it as a term of endearment, as like a sort of in-group reference to each other, right? And I'm curious about how the way the dictionary has treated that word has shaped the way it's treated other words that have been reappropriated by marginalized groups, right? Like the F-slur, which have their own history of insult and then reappropriation by the marginalized group. I'm curious about like how it looks different for a word like the F-slur as opposed to the N-word.
Yeah. Well, with the N-word, I think there was this realization over time. It struck me as like, okay, people aren't treating it that seriously. And maybe that's part of, you know, like what you just said, what's going on with culture, the way Black people are treated in America, that it's just a word, a common form of address that is okay to throw at someone. It's you know, it's usually derogatory, but that doesn't mean that's not quite as strong as totally offensive, don't use the word. And the change that you see being affected is directly connected to what's going on in the world.
Over the course of that word appearing in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, what kind of labels did they give to it in the dictionary? Like you said, like it said usually derogatory.
Yeah, we started with usually derogatory.
Right.
That was 1934. And what I found interesting is sort of the documents that are being chosen to analyze. And you can sort of figure out in the Merriam files, like, what are the editors looking at? Because they put date stamps on things that they are considering for drafting a revision or a new definition. So you have a sense of like, okay, the editor thought this was important and didn't think that was important. And in the 50s, I start to sense this change. Like there's a progressive, or at least an attempt to think more progressively about language. So editors are seemingly more conscious of the variegated usages of words. There was one slip included an excerpt from a 1945 government manual, Guide to Command of Negro Naval Personnel, which explicitly says how members of the military prefer to be referred to. And so you see that like, okay, someone thought that was important because it is important, right? So in the third, in 1961, the senses are both listed as usually taken to be offensive, which is the taken struck me as problematic because the taken means it's on the receiver, not on the user. And that was a common problem with the way that this word and other words were also categorized in the dictionary.
The presumption is like the person who is taking offense is not a white person, right?
Correct.
Like the white person is the speaker.
Correct. And
someone else is receiving.
Yes. Yeah. And also there was this usually taken to be offensive versus often taken to be offensive.
What's the difference between usually and often?
And often, right.
I mean, another example, Stefan, is the previous name of the enormously popular, enormously valuable NFL franchise that is right here in Washington, D.C., where you and I are talking, now known as the Commanders.
Washington's NFL team is changing its name. In a statement today, the Redskins confirmed they are retiring that name and their logo. NPR sports correspondent.
So how did the dictionary treat that word? Because that word was the name of this major sports team, and so it became like habituated into the landscape. Like people use it all the time. How does the dictionary treat a word that is a slur that a lot of people understand as a slur when it's completely normalized?
I think it's one of the most interesting stories about the nexus of language and culture and American history that you will find. I mean, look, the use of this word had to make it, the use of this word by the NFL team had to make it the most widely used racial slur in print. I can't think of any comparison. The reason it was perpetuated is because there was an acceptance that, this institution, the National Football League, is sanctioning the use of the word, therefore it can't be that bad. So the reason the name itself perpetuated is because the word itself was effectively neutralized in American culture. You start with the sort of the way that the word redskin was used as a common descriptive The belief is that the origin of the term was as neutral as a descriptive. But then in the 20th century, it becomes part of popular culture because there is no more. We've neutralized Native Americans, right? So they've just become like symbols used in pop culture, in movies, in the names of teams, in books for children.
And of course, like whenever teams have names that are derived, that are like references to indigenous people, they will say, "Oh, this is celebratory. This is a celebration of bravery of indigenous people, whatever."
And that was a later, that was really a later justification. That was a more recent, like a 21st century justification. I didn't find much evidence of that. Maybe there is, but I didn't find much evidence of that in the 70s when this topic first came up. It was more like, this is stupid. Like, why are we having this conversation? It's just accepted that it's okay to do this. And Native groups began protesting the use of mascots in this way in the late 60s and early 70s. But it doesn't bubble up until culture bubbles it up and makes it clear that there are people that disagree here. And the dictionary responds. I mean, I started seeing conversations about the degree of offensiveness of redskin in Merriam's files in the 1970s. There are these conversations between editors. And they begin gradually to change the dictionary's approach to the way to define this word. They basically, first thing they do is like take it out of children's dictionaries, the sort of acknowledgement that it doesn't belong and it is a slur, and then to sort of grade up the level of description of its offensiveness.
But so you write that like in the area where you find the N-word, right? There's also a word that was used to describe Native American women. Mm-hmm. How has the dictionary treated these sort of like archaic words, especially ones that used to be really loaded? How have they treated that? Like, how do they treat like the codification of those words?
I mean, they generally tried to treat them like any other words, but the way they treated them reflected the values of the times in which the editors lived. And with slurs, the main thing that's changed in dictionaries is instead of trying to define the word itself, it's rather defining it as a slur. And that's a important distinction because what you're saying is this is just offensive, full stop. And that's what this word is. These words have no other definition. The main import of them is that they are used as slurs. That's it. Ultimately, dictionaries don't need to define these sorts of slurs as the words themselves. They just need to define them as slurs. That's what they are. And as one editor at Merriam told me, with offensive words, the word's function is often the kernel of its meaning. The word is a vehicle for belittling, disparaging, insulting, etc., and it doesn't have much meaning beyond that.
When we come back,
words that emerge out of African-American vernacular English or Black culture and are disseminated widely into popular culture and then are used as weapons by regressive forces in culture. So they're taken and thrown back against the people that popularize them and use them.
That's after the break. Stay with us, y'all.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Ameriprise Financial. Chief Market Strategist Anthony Saglimbeni shares the importance of having a well-diversified portfolio.
An Ameriprise financial advisor can help build a saving strategy by looking at systematic ways to invest in stocks and bonds and alternative investments. They can construct a well-diversified portfolio through a retirement account or different types of accounts to help make it easier for investors to save in a structured way. And over time, the compounding interest of saving and investing helps build wealth. And so if an investor can do that, over time, that well-diversified portfolio can make investors feel a little bit more confident about their goals.
For more information and important disclosures, visit ameriprise.com/advice. Ameriprise Financial cannot guarantee future financial results. Securities offered by Ameriprise Financial Services, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from the University at Buffalo, a longtime leader in artificial intelligence research and implementation, where first-of-their-kind AI plus X degrees not only prepare students for an AI-powered world, but also help steer the responsible use of AI for a human-guided future. More at buffalo.edu/NPR.
Gene, just Gene this week. Code Switch. I've been talking with Stefan Fatsis. He's the author of Unabridged, The Thrill of and Threat to the Modern Dictionary. And I got stuck on this one part of the conversation about pronouns. He has a whole chapter about it in his book, and it gets to this, linguistic problem that people have been trying to solve for a long time. How do you refer to somebody in a gender-neutral way, if you don't know their gender? How do you refer to a bunch of people? You need words for those things. For the most part, people are not using he anymore to talk about, the default human being. But, okay, what do you do instead? Just in the last 100 years, academics and linguists have tried to make words like Z or Zir into a thing. Stefan told me way back in the 1940s, there was one newspaper, the Sacramento Bee, that tried to signal boost their favorite alternative pronoun.
That pronoun was here, H-I-R.
There was a whole thing with this word thon that people tried to make happen, like fetch in Mean Girls.
Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
People, regular people, just keep finding their way back to they. Merriam-Webster recently updated their definition of they to capture one of that word's most weighted contemporary meanings.
They. Pronoun. Used to refer to a single person whose gender identity is non-binary.
And the thing Stefan pointed out to me is that, look, language is not really a top-down affair. You can't really control whether a word gets picked up or hangs around, even if you introduce that word into the language with good intentions. And there are so many words that seem everywhere one moment, but are basically gone, obsolete in a year or two. And so we talked about what makes a word or language sticky. And the yearly convention of the American Dialect Society, in which linguists and lexicographers and just regular folks get together to make their cases for what they think should be the word of the year. And Stefan says that get-together is a lot of fun, but it can definitely get real intense.
You get academics, you get non-academics, you get young people who are way more attuned to the latest fluctuations, the newest words that want to sort of elevate extremely sort of sometimes really marginal use above other things. And you get older people that are totally confused and have to ask questions about what does that mean. We're talking about the American Dialect Society's Word of the Year vote, which happens every January at an academic linguistic conference. And the only reason it gets testy, I think, is that because there's a history of tension. Every year, somebody wants to pick a word or put forward a word that tells the world that, hey, we are a progressive institution and we should be commenting on the fact that something has happened in culture, as opposed to the more sort of lexicographic approach toward trying to identify a word that has really bubbled up in culture and reflects something larger, that it deserves to be picked as word of the year. So you get this tension. And you also get tension, too, with some academics who are more plugged in to what you just mentioned, where words come from, and particularly words that arise out of African-American vernacular English. So there was a year when, I can't remember the exact year, when woke was being debated heavily at Word of the Year. And a Black academic named Nicole Holliday rose up and said, this is an old word. It has been appropriated. It has just been reclaimed and popularized. And I think we should avoid that. So you get attention on where words come from and whether they should be promoted as some sort of archetype of American society. The C word, same thing. I mean, the conversation about the emergence of the word was central to the discussion at Word of the Year. And it ultimately someone noted that we should acknowledge that the word came from ballroom culture in the 1990s. Let's change the definition. And the great thing about an event like Word of the Year is that somebody is like typing and there's a big screen and he just changed the definition that would be printed in the, put in the news release.
That's so dope.
Because it's completely responsive.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what do you do with a word like woke, though? I mean, like, because it's been appropriated by people in a very derogatory way, but it also had a meaning that predated that the sort of generally negative connotations that it has now. Completely.
I mean, in my reporting, and I didn't uncover any of this, but, woke can be traced back to Leadbelly, the Southern black singer in the 1930s. And there are sort of usages of woke, meaning to be aware, to rise up, that appear over the decades. I mean, way before it takes off as sort of a common term across society. It's obviously not the only word that fits into that category. Words that emerge out of African-American vernacular English or Black culture and are disseminated widely into popular culture and then are used as weapons by regressive forces in culture. So they're taken and thrown back against the people that popularize them and use them. There are tons of examples of this. I mean, cancel is another word. Critical race theory, another phrase. Black power started as an in-group phrase of pride. It was twisted by whites to mean terrorism. You see this over and over in American history. I mean, DEI is probably the most volatile recent example of this, most destructive recent example of this. So how do you deal with it? I think you just deal with it the way that, like linguists deal with these things, is try to understand what's happened here, like do the historical research. At something like Word of the Year, it's much more emotional. So people stand up at the mic and they say their piece, and then someone will maybe change the definition on the screen and in the press release, and people will vote, and then they'll go have drinks. So it's not that serious an undertaking, and yet, like, the conversations are deeply serious. Delulu, someone stood up and said, there are people that find this word offensive because it comes out of, it's critical of mental health. Mm-hmm. And we need to be sensitive to that. In one of my first days when I was embedding at Merriam, an editor said to me, I was defining some word. I'm looking up some word and I asked her about it. I said, it's really interesting. I love it. And she's like, they're all interesting. That's what's great about it. It doesn't matter what the word is. It doesn't matter like whether it's, simple or complex or offensive. They're all interesting because they all have this robust history that merits preservation and conversation.
And to that point about what merits preservation, like what makes a word sticky, right? I mean, because there's so many words that we just use that have moments of like they're everywhere. Especially, I mean, I don't know if this changed in the age of the internet and social media, but like all these terms we have that sort of come and go, and I'm sure that predates social media. So like, how does the dictionary see its role in capturing these sort of zeitgeisty words that basically evaporate after a year or two?
The dictionary, and we're basically talking about Merriam-Webster at this point. Mm-hmm. In America, we're down to Merriam and Dictionary.com are basically the only two outfits that employ full-time lexicographers, and Dictionary.com has very few. This is an industry that, like other digital media, has to reinvent itself and try to figure out ways to survive. What's different today is that words come more quickly, right? Like it's so much easier to disseminate new slang and have it spread literally around the world. In some cases, there's no better example of that, and it wasn't slang, but COVID is the example, and I write about it in the book, of like the most rapid dissemination of a word, maybe in our history, a word that didn't exist, and within a month was familiar to everybody on the planet. And Merriam-Webster did this for it remarkable thing, which was that it entered COVID into the dictionary 34 days after the word was created. Normally, and this gets to the question that you just asked, Gene, normally it took years in the print age because the philosophy among editors was that words needed to demonstrate their stickiness. We need to see it over and over again in professionally edited publications. We need to see it disseminated widely in culture before we can give it our stamp of approval, because our stamp of approval means we're putting it in this book. And, the book sticks around and there are only so many pages and there are a lot of words. So we are making an editorial judgment about the validity and the lasting power of something. That's less of a concern now because the digital dictionary is bottomless. But you still only have a certain number of definers with limited amount of time to try to do all of this. So editors are still making those judgments and trying to be objective about what's stuck. But the timeline is definitely faster. So there's a willingness to put words in more quickly, not necessarily 34 days. COVID's the outlier. But in a year or two, you'll see words that didn't exist that bubbled up through social media and getting entered into dictionaries. And part of that is a competitive drive. Do you want to have material to give to the public? You want to have an update that says, hey, we just added Riz to the dictionary. Cool. And then people will go to the dictionary to look up Riz. And maybe look up other words too.
One of Merriam-Webster's most popular ever tweets you write about reads, I'm going to quote here, "People keep, 1, saying they don't know what genderqueer means, then 2, asking why we added it to the dictionary." and you write that it gets at something that like undergirds like so many of these modern, like the modern discourse disagreements about pronouns, like the presumption that gender is binary. So, like, how have Merriam-Webster's forays into using language about non-binary people, like their updated definition for they, that it talks about it as that pronoun as a term for non-binary people,
Correct.
How has that been received? Like, how has that been? What's been the response to them trying to fold that language in?
Merriam has approached gender the way it approaches everything, which is clinically, and by trying to determine the extent of usage and what should at any given time be admitted. The way Merriam has handled this is very carefully. I mean, when Merriam approaches and other dictionary makers approach revising these sensitive terms in these politically explosive times, there's a risk. When Merriam revised the definition of marriage, it got blowback.
How did it revise the definition of marriage?
By saying it was between two people as opposed to between a man and a woman. And Stephen Colbert did a segment on it 6 years after Merriam had updated the entry.
Now, I recently learned that Merriam-Webster's has changed the definition of marriage. It now includes the state of being united to a person of the same sex in a relationship like that of a traditional marriage. That means gay marriage. I'm beginning to suspect that Merriam and Webster were conjugating more than just irregular verbs.
And this was the old Stephen Colbert show on Comedy Central, where he's cosplaying a conservative commentator. And Merriam gets hit with, hate mail, threats. More recently, someone was actually arrested and convicted for sending threatening communications to Merriam because he was upset over the way that it defined woman. So it's volatile and it's dangerous. One reason that Merriam-Webster got rid of comments at the bottom of its dictionary entries was because of what you can imagine. Entries for these sorts of hot-button political topics end up being complete cesspools. So I won't say that it's kid gloves because Merriam and other dictionary makers want to reflect language as it's used and take proactive steps to make sure that definitions reflect modern usage. But there's always a risk there because language is inherently political.
And to that point, it feels like we're at this moment of semantic contention. A lot of language that is meant to deliberately obfuscate and hide the speaker's intent, all kinds of memes, everything that stuff comes out of 4chan, words that have one meaning that represent certain kinds of politics, getting hijacked by people with opposing politics. Obviously you said woke, but that happened with political correctness. We've done episodes on the trickiness of using words like genocide or people of color, POC. I'm curious, what you think it means for lexicographers if every word tinged with politics, not inevitably, but is very likely to be co-opted and rebranded and irradiated by the other side, like how do the people at the dictionary feel about their role in this discourse of trying to capture what these words mean?
I think patience is the way that lexicographers approach anything. So the editor of Merriam once told me that he never liked to update definitions entries too close to when they are exploding in popular conversation because of the likelihood that the meanings are going to abate. But when they don't abate, when they change the meaning of language, of particular words, it's the obligation of lexicographers to stay aware of how meanings are changing and catalog those changes. And at some point, make an editorial determination that we need our description of a word to reflect the way the meaning has changed. Editors don't consider themselves to be political. They consider themselves to be academics, clinical.
But you just said that all language is political.
But all language is political. So you are faced with this dilemma of how can the lexicographer be neutral and still be a functioning, thinking member of society. We all bring our biases to everything that we do, right? So the lexicographer is doing the same thing and trying to objectively take the volume of information that's out there, the way that human beings actually write and talk and communicate, and distill it in a way that reflects the way language exists now.
What are the threats to the modern dictionary?
The threats of the modern dictionary right now, Google and AI. Google for the last decade plus, since they started adding knowledge panels, knowledge boxes at the top of searches. That dissuades people from scrolling further down and finding a link to Merriam or Oxford or Cambridge or Collins or another commercial dictionary. And then AI, because, AI overviews got plenty of information in there. Is it trustworthy? Who knows? AI can craft a good definition. And it does that by both stealing from existing definitions. I mean, when I asked AI to define microaggression, which is a word that I had defined for Merriam-Webster, it basically spit back the language that I had written. So it has scraped somehow Merriam's data set. And those are inherent risks because of the commercial side. Fewer clicks means less advertising revenue, potentially. Fewer people going to your website to do the basic act of looking up words because, hey, I've gotten enough from whatever's at the top of my search page. And then the AI part is that you can train AI to write a whole dictionary. How useful will that be? I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's super useful. And I do think that at this point, like, human intervention is still required. We want to know that somebody has made a determination about what things mean. And that still requires a human editorial touch, I think. But, the next 20 years will tell us whether that's the case or not. The number of lexicographers in the United States has plummeted. There were around 200 20 years ago. It's probably around 30 now.
Wow, only 30.
This business has declined seriously. These big names that we used to know, Random House, American Heritage, Webster's New World, the dictionary that I got when I was 11 years old, they're either gone or they're barely updated. They're shells of what they once were. And that trend is not great for lexicography as a commercial enterprise. And whether something will replace it, who knows? But if you ask me, I think this is an important function of a civil society that I hope there's a way to preserve it.
Stefan Fatsis is the author of Word Freak and A Few Seconds of Panic. He was also one of the hosts of the sports podcast Hang Up and Listen at Slate. His new book is Unabridged, The Thrill of and Threat to the Modern Dictionary. Thank you, Stefan.
Thanks, Steve.
And that's our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch, all one word. If email's more your thing, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. And subscribe to the podcast on the NPR app or, wherever it is you get your podcast. You can also subscribe to the Code Switch newsletter by going to npr.org/Code Switch newsletter. Just a reminder that signing up for Code Switch Plus is a dope way to support our show and public media more broadly. You might have heard that we could use your help. And also, you get to listen to every episode sponsor free. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/Code Switch. This episode you're listening to was produced by Xavier Lopez and Jess Kung. It was edited by Leah Donnella and Dahlia Mortada, and our engineer was Jimmy Keeley. But I'll be remiss if I did not shout out the rest of the Code Switch Massive. That's Christina Kala, Verlyn Williams, and B.A. Parker. As for me, I'm Gene Debbie. Be easy, y'all.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Pete and Jerry's Eggs, inviting you to tag along with one of their organic pasture-raised hens as she heads out for her day in the pasture. She and her friends start to roam and forage, hunting for tasty organic snacks. And with 108 square feet per hen, there's plenty of space for everyone. Under the open sky, they can hear songbirds nesting in the trees. They bask in the sounds of nature as they prepare to lay their rich, delicious eggs. And when the sun starts to set, the crickets begin to sing. Time to catch one last squiggly snack before bedtime. To learn more about Pete and Jerry's organic pasture-raised eggs and the certified humane farms where their hens roam, visit peteandjerrys.com.